Wow, John. I mean, I knew you were into rape. I knew you were into rape, John, but I didn't know you were into horse rape.
Those are vicious lies. Those are
I,
vicious liberal lies.
I mean, I've seen your browsing history, dude.
Oh, come on.
Yes, it's official. You've heard it here, folks. Johnny Ringo, not John Punchak. Johnny Ringo, it likes to fuck horses. So let that be known.
Oh my
And
god.
I am
Fucking
distinguishing,
animal.
but I am distinguishing between Johnny Ringo and Johnny Punchak as two separate entities.
You fucking mongrel. God damn you, Adam.
You just doxed him?
Just doxed him.
I don't care.
It's getting out of hand.
No one watches Adam.
That's true.
Exactly. Okay, so
Do not roast the host, please.
okay, so today I want to talk about some bullshit with United Airlines recently. So you guys remember when, or do any of you recall when United Airlines said they were going to give some bonuses to their employees, like a really small bonus that really didn't make any difference?
Yeah,
Yes,
I remember that.
It was like
Yeah.
$1,000 over a long term.
Yeah. It was really insignificant. It accounted to like maybe like an extra $10 or $15 on their paycheck or something. It was like nothing, essentially. So they decided to replace that with an actual lottery, a lottery. So, according to an article on CNN titled "Feeling Lucky," employees of United Airlines weren't. The lottery would have paid $100,000 to one lucky employee selected at random, along with smaller bonuses of $2,000 or $5,000 to about 1,300 other employees. And then other employees would have gotten prizes including 50 vacation packages or 10 Mercedes. So I view this as
Great. Yeah.
I view this
Why give your employees any kind of a bonus when you can offer them the chance to get a Mercedes? I mean, come on.
Hey,
Yeah.
now let's not steamroll the host.
Hey, let's not have actual like monetary compensation to people who need it. Let's give them the chance to sign up for a lottery where maybe they could win something good. Fuck off. Oh
Right.
my
as
god.
I view this as like the people on top just viewing their employees as not really important.
As not people.
Taking their careers as like jokes, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean,
what kind of message does this send to the employees?
Well, I know.
How would any of you feel if you?
I know what message this sends. It sends the message that you should gamble for your chances of actually getting something good. It's like feed your gambling habit. These incentives are all you have, so work hard.
Right.
Basically, what they're saying is you'd have a better time gambling than you would getting a bonus from us.
Essentially.
Yeah, just go for the actual lottery. You'll have the same chances of winning.
All right. But I like how some of their prizes wasn't even like money. It was just like, oh, you might get a vacation or a new car. We know you really
don't include vacations in the employee package. No, we'll do it in a lottery.
Right.
You barely go ahead, Navar.
No, it's just like this makes it very like unprofessional as well, because like the whole idea is it's supposed to be all set. Like you don't have this. It's not meant to be a joke. Like this is people's lives that we're talking about. Like these people are playing with people's lives at this point. People need that money to live, and that it's become a joke where, oh, you might be able to earn enough to live. It's a joke, and I personally believe it doesn't belong in the business in any way.
No.
Well, unfortunately, there's already a rampant problem in America with corporations and companies just not giving their workers a living wage. But with this case, it seems like they're trying to put incentives in place that will just make people work harder for something that really just comes at the discretion of the people up top, as if, like, you know,
Well,
as if that's
no,
any.
it doesn't give. It gives no one any incentive to work harder. If it's a
Well,
lottery, it's random.
Yeah. In fact, like, I'd say it actually takes away from people trying as hard. I mean, it may seem like, I mean, it would be for that, but it would, I feel like it would stop that. Like, people wouldn't actually try anymore because the ones that would be able to be addicted to it, sure.
well,
But
I'm not trying to say that this is what is happening. I'm trying to say that
oh
that's
yeah,
what they were
no,
trying to do.
sure.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, and
but
there's,
it would, yeah. No, go ahead, Adam.
oh yeah, and this is obviously something that wouldn't encourage people to work harder if the rewards are selected at random. You know, it's
Yeah.
like why would you work harder essentially? And what I think is interesting about this is like the dichotomy that exists between like American corporations and then jobs in a lot of European countries where they have not only like better wages but also like guaranteed like vacation time and stuff and
And
maternity.
guaranteed packages.
Oh, you mean workers' rights?
Yeah. um, and,
What are those? We don't have those in America.
and the fact, and also like if you're a pilot or a hostess on a plane, I mean that's not like a minimum wage job. That's something that's a job. That's like a career that should earn you enough money and maybe some benefits to where you don't need any supplementary income. So it's
Right,
just
but you have to. Pardon me. Go ahead.
oh, it's just odd to see this from a really large corporation.
I mean, United has not been the best in the news over the last
no,
like year or
no,
so.
no.
No,
It
still
doesn't
not.
exactly surprise me that they're doing this, but still.
Right.
I mean, I guess they gained a little bit of social capital when they broke ties with the NRA, but still, even just a couple years before that, there was that whole incident of a man needlessly being assaulted and dragged off a plane.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
last year. That wasn't even a couple years ago.
No, that was a few
Yeah.
years ago.
No,
Was
it
it
was
a
like
few years
it
ago?
was like 2 years ago, I thought. Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
some
I thought it was like 2015 meme.
The time flies. I don't even know what year it is.
What year is it, Daniel? Come on.
Oh
Stop
man.
looking at your phone. Come on. You're lost.
In terms
Uh,
of wages, though, that come from the company, you also have to keep in mind that there are other jobs that go along with working at an airport and any, flight company. So there's anything from, oh, are you going to be the person that's checking people in? Are you going to be the person that is a flight attendant? Are you going to be the person that's doing the luggage? There's so many different layers, and certain people do make minimum wage there, unfortunately. Like sometimes, for example, aircraft cleaners, like they make minimum wage sometimes, and I know that uh, like luggage carriers tend to make minimum wage, at least in some companies. I have I have looked at jobs at the airport before, and they do not pay very much if you do not want to be a flight attendant.
Right. Yeah, I mean I'd imagine jobs in the company would, vary as far as like skills and um pay and stuff. So uh,
Well, I mean, with that, it also like going on the whole idea of this lottery system. So, if we were to say that this was to work, then there would be issues of other businesses doing the same thing, and then it becoming a normal practice. I mean, sidetracking for a moment, as an example, if you look at video games where microtransactions got added in, and then so many other things like loot boxes and things, like it's now you've got a time where that has become the focus rather than a story or whatever. So I feel like if a business starts moving towards where it's like, oh, you can work, but there's a small chance that you'll be paid, it shouldn't be that in any way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we can all agree that companies should not be allowed to to do this at all. It doesn't even make sense, and it's just ridiculous that there's not like more regulations in the U.S. for workers' rights. So, and this is just something that kind of highlights that. This is something that you would think would like would exist in some like I don't know. Like if I like explain this to someone who never heard of this, they might think I'm like reading a fucking an article from the Onion or something. So
It is very satirical sounding.
yeah,
You know, something that was odd to me when I was looking at jobs through airline companies, especially things like United and Delta, they would, if it was a full-time job, you know, uh, tell you that you would get a 401k account, well, help with 401k and potentially like health insurance coverage. But aside from that, they kind of withheld any information about like paid time off or sick leave or anything like that, which is kind of suspicious because a lot of companies, when you're looking into full time, try and specify like if you get any paid time off.
right. Yeah, that seems like a red flag to me if they want to like withhold information like that. Like, no, we're not gonna tell you what benefits or pay you might get until we hire you. Even that's a big if.
Well, and then they also ask you to like, oh, we're gonna like put down how much you want on the thing so that, if you don't know what the other rates are, they can lowball you.
Yeah, it's really scummy. They'll basically say like if their normal rate is say 11.50 an hour and you say I'll take $9 to $11 an hour, they'll be like, "Okay, we'll give you 9.50 an hour."
Right. Yeah. I can see that being kind of shitty. Um, so Willow, are you dead over there? Have you fallen asleep already?
No, I was sending a friend like I think I sent like
Oh, you're sending
around
news, eh?
no, I sent about 15 different books Trotsky had written. I was suggesting things to him.
God damn.
Thought is an action.
You fucking
The whole like airline thing, I don't know. It's just like it removes the incentive to work, which is what was said earlier. I mean, it was United Airlines, right?
yes.
Yes.
I mean, that company has been a horrendous. The company has been shit for decades now. With what you said about low wages, with fucking people over, with the strikes, with the pilots and the crew of the planes having to sleep on the fucking floor of a plane and not getting much rest themselves. Like pilots having to do back-to-back flights and not getting much sleep, being treated like shit, being paid like shit, and then now their incentive to actually do well is being taken away by a lottery, which you have little to no chance of winning. So, really, like, what is keeping this company aside from low wage? Like having a low wage at a company, you would think, oh, we'll just go somewhere else. Well, no, these people are skilled laborers. First of all, second of all, any downtime is a bad time when you're working low wages. So working low wages locks you into a job because you can't quit, but you also can't take time off to find another job and do other interviews because you can't afford to take time off. So this low wage job locks you in. You can't just quit and find a new job because A, the job market is fucking ridiculous, but also you can't afford a day off if you're making low fucking wages. Like $9 an hour is not a lot of money. But then you have no incentive. Well, if there's no incentive to do well, then your employees aren't going to respect the company. When you don't respect your employees, you're not going to respect the company, which is exactly what happened where I used to work. No one respected the company because the company didn't respect any of us. So we did shit, and the company is now faltering for that over the past couple of years because no one's producing like they should have been, like normal benefited employees would. So it's like, well, it kind of shows like we don't really give a fuck about you. Your incentives are not there anymore. We're just gonna give a lottery and maybe a couple cars and some, a couple $1,000 to a random fucking person. A person could be, an A+ pilot or a piece of shit employee who is an asshole, who sucks at their job, who isn't, worthwhile keeping at the company, but they do anyway because of whatever fucking reason. So it's not fair. It's not just. The people who should be rewarded aren't being rewarded. It's potentially someone who is just a crappy employee. There's always going to be the argument of whoever wins that, someone else was more well-deserved. But then you think, well, it's just a lottery. It's kind of by chance. But that's the problem. It's by chance. The wrong people are being rewarded, but not fairly rewarded. They're being overly rewarded at a random chance to the detriment of people who deserve and work a lot harder potentially than they do. Or don't work as hard, but face more bullshit during their day, increasing their stress, making it, an argument of, well, you may work physically harder, but I have to deal with customers who are angry because they fucked up their package or their baggage or their plane ticket or something. So now I'm being screamed at and I have to fix their mess. Like that. It's just not rewarding them properly. And, again, that's disrespectful to the workers. And when you don't respect your workers, they're not going to respect you and they're not going to work properly. So, right. I mean, United can fuck off for all I care.
Right. And with a system like that, to make it work properly, they would need to have bonuses based on performance. And it would have to be in different tiers based on, like, what job you have, and, bonuses are given out based on, who has the best performance. And it's not like, oh, 1 or 3 people get these bonuses. It's like we give quite a few bonuses. Maybe most people get bonuses if they do well and they perform well. It's an incentive. Maybe everyone can get bonuses.
Right. I mean, a good system would be everyone has the bonus over their head. Everyone has an incentive. You do this much, or you do this, whatever. You come in this many days straight, or unless there's like a valid excuse like sickness or death in the family. You do this thing, you can get this much bonus. You do these 2 things, well, then you get an additional on top of that, reaching a maximum level of, let's say, $1,000, just as a ballpark, number estimate out there. If you give people tiers and things to do, but also you leave little nuances in those tiers to kind of remember, like maybe some people can't complete these tasks effectively as the next person due to physical or mental health or situational, life issues like kids or death in the family. That, again, incentivizes people to work harder, but you have to be aware that these incentives may be exploitative in nature as well, because if these employees are saying, okay, well, there's a $1,500 bonus above my head, well, I'm only making $8 an hour. So it's not like they give a fuck. They're paying you low, which gives them the ability to give you these large incentives. But like it's kind of like, well, they're paying you so low, so you're working so hard, even maybe you're not able to do this kind of thing, but you're pushing yourself for this incentive because you're so poor and broke and you have mouths to feed at home potentially, or whatever. So yes, this is a good program. This is a good potential way of showing your employees to work hard and that we respect you, but you have to be aware that these programs can also be used by predatory companies to exploit their workers. Right. And they use these as excuses. Well, we're paying you so low, but you have these bonuses, so you don't really need these higher wages, do you? Would you rather have $8 an hour or $10 an hour, one with incentives and one without? It's just a stupid way of trying to, fuck people over, essentially.
Well, if the incentives on a lower paycheck does not equal out in an annual salary to, well, what the salary comes out to be annually to what a higher salary with no incentives would be, then why would you do that?
Right. But you're using logic, and companies don't do that. Companies don't give a fuck about that because
Oh,
companies, all they care about is profit.
oh, I know. I'm not talking about companies. I'm just talking about like I'm
People
just
in
talking,
general.
yeah, because there are more and more places that are trying to slowly raise things, and unfortunately, with places that don't, these people are stuck there. But anyone that has an opportunity in places where, like, they know they can get out of a system and get to somewhere better, I've seen people who have, you know, these are extreme examples, let's say, but I have seen a few people who have college degrees and still take work that is far beneath them simply because they have gotten into a cycle and a system where they don't feel like they can get out of it. They don't feel like they could ever find a better job because they don't have the skills necessary. And in this day and age, even if you have a college degree, a lot of places will turn you away for that.
Right. Like the unfortunate reality is a lot of college graduates, depending on the field, like if you go to school for like liberal arts or something, okay, yeah, you're like that's good. Learn whatever the hell you want. I am totally for educational freedom. If you want to go to school for liberal arts, go do you. But be realistic at the same time and kind of don't expect a job right away. But if you go for something like mechanics, the unfortunate reality is, yeah, there's a lot of positions for mechanics, but a lot of people get trapped in that cycle of low wage work. But then also a lot of mechanic shops pay low wage work sometimes because they're fucking ridiculous and they don't pay people what they're worth.
Right. Unfortunately, it all circles back to the companies not paying people fair wages and just pocketing the money themselves.
Right, and it rings kind of true to the saying in leftist circles where profits are just stolen wages. Because a company like, let's say, Walmart, they're the most profitable company in the world, I think, at around $458 billion in 2016. In that's how much they made. That's not total like rev or profit. That was revenue. Within that comes out like taxes, which they don't fucking pay, and just all the things that the company has to pay for. But then after that, there's still tens of billions of dollars in revenue that if they paid their employees, I think it was something like $5,000 more a year, that would only cost a couple $1 billion. Walmart can sure as fuck pay their employees easily much more money, but they won't. And in places like Puerto Rico, where Walmart is the biggest employee because the manufacturing base of Puerto Rico got fucking gutted after Congress put in place some like low tax reforms and a bunch of bullshit, and then took those away, I think, in the 90s. And then Puerto Rican companies were like, well, fucking bye, we're paying more taxes. Like, hell no, we're going to go somewhere else. Fucked off the island. And then it left basically shitty, real low wage retail to fill the gap, which is Walmart and like Target and shit. Right. And they don't pay their employees enough. And a lot of people in Puerto Rico struggle to pay for lively expenses. They have the ability to pay them more, but they won't because that will cut into profit, and that will cut into the Walton family's fucking multi-billion-dollar a year profit. So, what do? The fat cat billionaires or the petty fucking, poor little, disgusting, dirty workers in Canada or United States or fucking Puerto Rico or something? Right. Obviously, the CEO is worth more to at least certain societies like American society.
Yeah. I was also thinking that this could serve as sort of an example for why maybe it would be a good idea for companies to be a bit more democratic in the way they run things, at least in terms of how people get paid. So allowing workers to vote on stuff like that maybe big.
Well, sorry, what?
So maybe that could be a good way of preventing, because like, who like only like a retard would vote in favor of a fucking lottery as opposed to like better wages, you know?
Right. I mean, the unfortunate reality is I can get into a little spiel, but the unfortunate reality in a capitalist system is that a company doesn't want to give workers a voice because then the workers' voice will always, almost always, be a detriment to the company.
Of
If
course.
you give a worker the right to speak, to power, and to speech within the company's process in a democratic or an actually democratic vote, not a pseudo democratic vote, then the company will always lose. Not as in like the company will crumble, but the company's interests in terms of profit and in terms of keeping wages low and whatever, people are going to vote for benefits. People are going to vote for higher wages. You know, and that's why unions aren't welcome. Like leftist unions, not the like shitty conservative unions in the United States. Like leftist unions aren't welcome. Workers' councils aren't welcome because this means that companies are forced to listen and obey potentially to the will of the worker.
All right.
And that is not welcome in a capitalist society because in a capitalist society, they are supposed to fuck you over, and they do effectively. And it's the propaganda campaign of it's the free market is extremely successful in or a country like America. Companies fucking over or people is just the free market doing its fucking thing. So why would you inhibit the free market, right? Wages are just fucking property or company theft.
Right, yeah. I get what you're saying. I think I lost my train of thought.
You're gonna get a lot of people mad with what you just said.
Good, I don't give a fuck.
Well, another thing is usually it's always the worker versus the people who run the business.
Well,
Like you very rarely do you actually get when they're working together or are happy with the positions that they're in. You used to with places like game makers. Like back in the day, games were made for fun, whereas nowadays it's just a full-on industry and business where it's just money centered. The worker is always fighting. It's always a fight rather than enjoying what you're doing. That's another issue. And going back to that whole idea of the lottery, it doesn't work because it brings up that now you're fighting even more to simply earn something that could just be either a higher wage or a small bonus. But
right.
Yeah.
Well, what I think is kind of weird is how like in a government or in states, it's sort of like democracy is looked upon. Being able to vote for representatives and leaders is viewed as like a good thing. But then like why is it not a good like why doesn't that same idea apply for businesses so much? I mean, I think Willow basically hit the nail on the head, but that it interferes with profits and stuff essentially.
Well, I mean,
but what I'm saying here is that they think there's a double standard here. It's like, why is democracy okay in this instance but not okay in this instance? Is what
because like capitalism demands a hierarchical structure of bosses above employees, whereas the essence of democracy is for the people, by the people, whatever the fuck the American saying is. It's democracy is supposed to be, in its essence, the people governing the people. There isn't much hierarchy besides the people you elect, and they are supposed to be below you in a system of power where you are supposed to be the ultimate. It's supposed to be an upside down pyramid kind of thing. But in a private company, it's the opposite. It's a top down approach where the boss tells the manager, or the boss tells the managers tells their superiors, and the superiors tell you. You're not allowed to get a say in what happens in management because you're not management, you're production or your retail or your whatever, your cash.
Right.
So a private company is not supposed to work the same as a democratic governmental institution for whatever reason. I don't know, but in a capitalist system, it demands a hierarchical structure. Because again, if the workers had a voice in democratic vote, it would go against the interests of the private property owners and shit like that.
Right, but if a government run that way, we would call it a dictatorship. You know?
Exactly. Like, which is the problem with, like, my particular governmental structure and my workplace structure are very similar. It's democratic in the way that leaders rotate, union leaders rotate, political leaders rotate, representatives rotate, representatives of the workplace rotate. Like, you have to keep a continuing rotation of power for various reasons. Like, I could say, I think it was Trotsky who wrote, in a socialist society, you always have young revolutionaries keeping power, like rotating within power, because it keeps the revolutionary flow going and it doesn't create a stagnant bureaucracy, which is what happened in the USSR and what is happening in China. So you got to keep leadership rotating, but you got to keep it rotating with people who understand the current struggles of the modern day, which is the youth, and who are revolutionaries and not just kind of lazy fat cat fucking capitalists. It's the same thing when it comes to the workplace and leadership. You're supposed to keep it rotating so shit keeps going and people can understand the plight of the people they're around. Like, I don't like the idea of electing a fucking 70-year-old bureaucrat. He doesn't know what the fuck is going on with me. And the same thing with the workplace. I don't want to elect a leadership of the workplace or of the union of someone who isn't from this kind of industry. Why would I hire a cashier to represent the interests of the bread maker? Makes no fucking sense. So, I mean, why workplace doesn't function like a democracy is beyond me. It's a totally authoritarian model, and I say get the fuck rid of it, obviously.
Right.
Yeah, especially in the case of when somebody inherits an already existing, like, large business or corporation. Like, if, like, their father was the original owner and founder and then he died and passed the business on to their son, like, you think that person knows anything about the people who work at the very bottom of that fucking factory or that plant or whatever it is? Of course not. Like, there's absolutely a disconnect there, and that wealth, that disconnect doesn't just have to do with wealth. It has to do with how our society perceives wealth as an indicator of social status and social value in our society. Wealth is social capital. Wealth isn't just physical capital, it's social capital as well.
Right. Oh, and Will, about your remark about, why would you vote some 70-year-old bureaucrat? I have one name for you: Bernie Sanders. I think that's a guy that actually, like, gives a fuck about people. I'm just saying.
That's a rare example. That's an outlying example.
I know
Bernie is one of the rarest examples of somebody who actually gives a shit about the working class in America.
But I only need one.
Oh, okay, so sure.
One example unravels my whole point. Fucking got me.
No.
Oh my god, no.
It's basically anecdotal at that point.
No, I get it.
I mean, it's something I just thought of as John was talking with shareholders. A company is beholden to the shareholders because the shareholders prop the company up. So the board has to do what the shareholders want, not what the employees want, which, to me, the shareholders wouldn't have, not even to me, the shareholders wouldn't have the wealth from that company if the workers didn't generate that wealth with their labor and with their labor. So to me, if I was a company owner, I would tell the shareholders to go fuck themselves and put the workers first, and then the workers, the company, and the shareholders. But for some reason, again, in this very authoritarian, bureaucratic style of business running, it's shareholders slash business and then the workers. Again, it's top down. It's not bottom up, which is what it should be because the company is built structurally bottom up.
Right. Well, in a socialist model, there wouldn't even be shareholders really anyway, because it would be socially owned and operated. The workers would own and operate that business.
Yeah, that's the thing, though.
So the only shareholders, quote unquote, would be the people who are actually working in that factory or in that plant every day.
Right.
And that's who should be owning and operating that business.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, though. That would make sense if the people had a hand in the business in some way, or at least a share in the business. But most of these business, the shareholders are the ones who own the business because of the money that they've put into specific parts of it. I mean, it would be nice if it worked the other way, but then that would mean that people would have to have enough to own a part of the business. Which at that point it would become kind of private rather than public. I feel like, because then it would be owned by someone. But again, it's really
yeah,
weird.
under the current model, yes, the shareholders who own majority stakes in the stock of today's companies, that is private ownership. That's private ownership of the industrial means of production. That's unregulated capitalism.
Yeah.
That's like the whole point. Yeah.
And they do. I mean, with the current system, sure, it's not great, but their attempt at making it work is, sure, the whole up to down system sucks, but they've put other things in place as an attempt to make it work. So you have things that limit what businesses can do. There are set amounts like the minimum wage, or how much you could be paid. Or at least it can't go below a certain amount. Sure, it's not, it's not great, the minimum wage, but at least that limit is there. Imagine without that limit, where a business can give you pretty much nothing to do the same job as now.
Right.
It sucks,
but
something is there. Maybe that thing needs work rather than just completely changing the whole thing.
But the issue is it's not working. The minimum wage has been failing people for decades now. And
Yeah.
the argument you're making is complacency within a system that isn't working. The system, no matter how much you attempt to reform capitalism, you won't reform it. There is always going to be an exploitative nature within that system. And you can even look at Sweden or Denmark or Norway or whoever. Okay, yes, those people have inherently better lives than we do. Their work shift is lesser, their pay is higher, they pay higher taxes, but they actually get rewarded for their work through their taxes. But the companies they work for, which is, the capitalist system, go to other countries and exploit workers in those countries to generate the profits and give the workers of those countries the means to create that wealth. So yes, the people in those countries have better lives, but at the detriment of people in other countries. I live a poor life in Canada, but I also live a great life in comparison to the rest of the world. But I'm not complacent in that fact because I know that the computer I'm using right now has coltan from the Congo. I know that the plastic is probably from some oil company or some oil in fucking Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, or Canada. I know that this computer is made by cheap Chinese labor, and the mic I'm using was also made by cheap Chinese labor. So I'm using things to the detriment. My life is improved at the detriment of somebody else, and that is the inherent flaw in capitalism.
That's
so
the
yes,
problem. That's what we're trying to fix, and it's two things really. Number one, it becomes impossible in a modernized, technological society to avoid having these things. And like we need these commodities. We need to be able to communicate. We need a lot of the devices that we have and that we use. And it also brings up a problem of, because capitalism
John, you're pinging out real bad.
has so
Yeah,
thoroughly
real bad.
ingrained itself
John,
into
you're morphing with the chair.
You're
You're
becoming
robotic
one
as
with.
fuck.
He's cyborging out.
I mean,
He's cyborg.
I'm not sure if you can even hear us now, but what he's basically trying to say is we've become so ingrained in this globalized society of capitalism where there is no escaping it no matter how hard you try. We have to use the fruits of somebody else's labor to make ours better. You know, there are no well, there probably are, but there are very little, if any at all, computer manufacturing within Canada, and or iPhone manufacturers within the United States or whatever. You know, it becomes a problem where we have to use the fruits of exploitation in other countries to make our lives better. That's just the nature of a consumerist society and economy like we have now. We live in very service and consumer based societies where companies have to go to China or India or Vietnam to produce cheap goods for Americans to buy, and that props up our economy. You know, it would make sense to live in a manufacturing society where you manufacture it here and then you can buy it, blah blah blah. But that would cause an increase in price, and people don't want to pay more expensive things, and it becomes a marketing problem as well, which I'm not going to get into. But there's basically no escaping the system. There's no way to escape that continuous cycle.
when
No, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that when capitalists are allowed legally to outsource labor to third world countries, it's a legal okay stamp on those kinds of abuses. When they're allowed to lobby to industries, that's the
John,
abuse that they're
you're
able to do
still
legally.
you're cutting out. Leave and come back.
Well, to quickly, while he's coming back, the thing with it is there could be a possible way to fix this, but I don't think it'd be possible. Not at least in this in my lifetime. But if we were to find a way to have the system be extended, so have each place, like each country, have its own businesses, like instead of having China make a specific thing for the people, and then that is made cheaply, and then that's sent over to somewhere like America, where then the last few touches are made and the logos put on. Oh, it's our thing. If all of these were actually done in America or wherever it is that it's being sold, then more people would have jobs there. More people would have things to do to be paid for. Now, I don't know how much that would work, but I feel like that would be a lot better.
Yeah, because things would cost a lot more.
It would be a lot better in terms of us, but capitalism is the accumulation of capital. You do what you can to accumulate capital, and at the point of capitalism we're at, which is late stage capitalism, imperialism and conquest becomes the norm. And the new kind of neocolonialism and neo-imperialism isn't so much conquest of land for the sake of resources like it would be in World War I and World War II. Because at that point we started to shed the idea of territorial land grabs and conquest. Now it's a new kind of colonialism, a new kind of imperialism where companies go to these countries, because a company think of this as an economic point of view. You're Walmart. Would you rather buy more expensive products from an American company where, yes, it's made in America, where labor standards are significantly better than in China, but it costs, let's say, $15, where you could go to China where it's significant, where labor regulations are lesser, environmental regulations are lesser, pay is a lot cheaper, which comes back in cheaper goods. You could pay $15 or you could pay $2. Well, in a system where people are paid low, cheaper goods are better because then you can keep wages low as well. because instead of paying for $15, which is basically the federal minimum wage times fucking 2, literally, you could pay $2 instead of 15. So we live in a society where it's based on service and consumerism. So cheaper goods in this kind of economy is the way you have to go when you pay people so low anyway. Capitalism is the accumulation of capital, the accumulation of wealth and money and profits. And companies and people do what they can in this kind of system to limit how much they spend and grow how much they earn. So yes, what you're saying would be better, and in a socialist system, that's how it would function, because in a socialist system, the economy is planned. Well, there are market socialists, but, forget about that. In the socialist economy, things are planned for the needs of people, not inventing new needs in the form of, these info TV commercials of like, is your life hard when you do this basic fucking task? Oh, well, here's this new product that you need to improve. There's none of that in a socialist system because it's based on need and how much you can do, not profits and lesser, bullshit.
The problem is that corporations are allowed to lobby. They're allowed to outsource. And they legally have to make as much money as humanly possible. It's a legal mandate to make quarterly growth. So in order to make that legal mandate, they have to do whatever they can. Outsource as many jobs to India or Africa as humanly possible. It's legal for them to do, and they do so.
Right.
And an example would be coltan mining. Canada, North America has, Mexico and the United States have no coltan mining operations of significance, or even at all, from what I remember. Canada is the only one. We produce about 4% of coltan production in the entire world, and that's shrinking because coltan producers don't want to deal with the environmental and labor regulations that Canada has in place to protect their workers and environment. So instead, they're going to countries like Venezuela or countries like the Congo, where resources are plentiful and labor regulations and environmental regulations are not. It's cheaper and easier to use these shady third world or developing, I prefer developing, but developing nations. It's easier to exploit the people in those nations because they're poor and they'll do anything for work, and the regulations are lesser compared to Canada, where we have high regulations and it costs more to produce here than in the Congo or in wherever. So, if things weren't so expensive here, we would have a coltan mining operation, and producers would be buying from Canada because, it would just be whatever. But in a capitalist system where profit is everything, you don't want to buy more expensive coltan from Canada because of production costs. You want to buy cheaper coltan from the Congo to make laptops and iPhones for a cheaper price. So consumers can buy it more efficiently and have more reach to these products. So Apple and Samsung and Acer and whoever can make more profit in the long term.
It is really hard to regulate corporations in the way that the Nordic countries do, because you have to take away certain legal abilities that they have in the United States, like lobbying, like outsourcing. You have to make certain heavy regulations and prevent these corporations from lobbying to change them. And that's something the United States doesn't do.
Right.
Well, I mean, a way to look at it would be one of the main issues. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
All right.
I think we have beaten this topic into the ground, and it's become something new.
Kind of always tends to happen with me in the room.
So that was wonderful. I think Lauren, if she's here
live
listening to
Yeah,
me,
I'm here.
wanted to bring up some things related to the environment that's going on that she wasn't interested in, that she's much more knowledgeable about than I am. So if she is ready to take the floor, I will let her talk. No pressure.
All right, so there's been a lot of issues with pollution in the oceans. Obviously, like, there's been a lot of issues with climate change, and it's been rapidly increasing. But it also affects our oceans, and the waters are getting warmer, and it's affecting everything. Unfortunately, certain certain places are getting too warm to hold life. The Great Barrier Reef, within the last 2 years, has had about 2/3 of spots that were previously unbleached become completely bleached, which unfortunately cannot be recovered from. And in the last 5 years, the Great Barrier Reef has probably declined more than 70%, which is terrifying to think because it was the largest reef known to, known to humans, and it held such amazing life. And
Yeah.
other things that, like, happen when coral bleaching, like, happens. Invasive species come in, like starfish and whatnot. So you'll get certain creatures that will predatorily take over places that start dying off, which is unfortunate because it just causes a lack of biodiversity in an area.
All right. I think you mentioned to me previously that the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef is due to like temperature changes. Remember that
Yes,
correctly?
yes. The waters are getting so warm that the coral is releasing plant-like material, and it's dying off. Unfortunately, it's coral is a living material. It's very basic life, but it is a living material. Um, so it's not being able to adjust quickly to this kind of environmental pressure, so it's just dying.
I thought it was just colorful rocks.
Well,
So
even sponges are alive.
right.
Well, I'd say a beautiful way to look at this is we have many problems with uh, finding ways to make our lives easier in certain ways, which make other things worse. For example, the whole thing with you have oil spillages to the point where which kills many, not just plant life, but other species of fish that just get completely wiped out by things like this. You have instances like this where, again, it's being affected in such a horrible way. We could have a way to at least prevent or fix this, but I feel like any money that could go towards that would be cut pretty much completely, and then put into different areas. Again, it would go into areas like the military or other things that the government would feel is a lot more worth. It's like no one would have ever gone to space if it wasn't for war. The moment someone says, "Oh, we'll go to space," oh, well, I want to go to space. We're gonna quickly have to go there before anyone else does, and you get that a lot in the Western world where a lot more can be done for the world, but it's just I want to be in the front for this and that. I'm not going to put it into anything else. I'm sure science would be able to find a way to solve that issue. It's just no money is ever put into it for that, and it probably will never
Right.
happen unless it becomes, unless it affects life up here. rather than just down there.
Right.
Well, I mean, it's already affecting life up here and very di- disastrous. Maybe not for us specifically right now, but in the future generation, like I will live to see many areas of the world. I think all of us here will live to see many areas of the world flooded, like Florida or the Netherlands or lower lying areas of China or Europe or everywhere really. Um, there was an example of kind of bat. I think it was a kind of bat, or no, fuck, was it a bat or a frog? There's two different examples I'm thinking of. I think it was a frog. Someone, no, I'm fucking blanking on what this example was now.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm
An,
sorry.
an animal died.
It had something to do with climate change. I'm blanking out to have to reread what I was thinking about, but an example Lauren was talking about earlier with the coral bleaching. The oceans, like rainforests, are basically lungs for the planet. They absorb CO2 through like waves crashing and shit. The oceans absorb a massive amount of CO2 every year. And with that, it very slowly and incrementally increases the acidity of the oceans, and that is a really big contributor to coral bleaching as well, because coral needs a very, very, very specific pH level, and they need a very, very certain temperature. It can't be too hot, but it can't be too cold, and the pH has to be just right. So you see, coral, like other plants, can't just migrate north or south as the climatic times shift. Coral is a very stationary kind of organism, so it tends to bleach and die off instead of and then grow, like more grows later on in the future. Like there was an example in Italy. There's this island in Italy and it has a giant castle. It's actually a big tourist attraction. I couldn't fucking tell you what it's called, so don't even ask. But there's this island. One and a half of the island, there's coral, there's like seaweeds, there's fish galore. It's fucking like a beautiful tropical paradise in this Mediterranean Sea area. The other side of the island is volcanic. So there's vents, there's fucking hardly any life, there's almost no plant life, there's absolutely no coral. And it was representing that it's a more extreme example, but it's showing that even in the surrounding area, because the pH of the water is higher because there's more CO2 from the core of the earth and shit and more gases and more methane and stuff, the surrounding area is dead. And it's kind of showing that as the pH of the oceans increase, fish are going to die, coral is going to die, weeds are going to die, things are going to have to migrate to places they were never before, putting pinning various species against each other who were never even fucking seen each other before or would have never ever seen each other before in the future. Like there was a great white shark found in the Bay of Fundy, and this is in Nova Scotia.
What?
A shark was found in fucking Canada. There was a bull shark found in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which again is even more northern than the Bay of Fundy. There are freshwater sharks being spotted in more northern rivers. There are spiders from Mexico and Central America being spotted in Texas. There are fish being spotted in Canada that were previously in the Caribbean. Like everything is migrating north. There are brown recluse spiders in Ontario now, where again they were very rare. They still are, but they're increasingly more common now. Like with what was that virus? Zika or whatever it was called? I think it was called the Zika virus.
Yeah.
Climate change had an effect on the migration of that north.
Right.
With I think it was mosquitoes.
Yeah, it was Zika.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like what Lauren was talking about the coral bleaching. It's not even just biodiversity. That's a big thing about it, but it has a lot to do with us. We use those like fishing schools that rely on other fish from those reefs, well, where are they going to get their food from? They're going to have to migrate, or they're going to die, or they're just not going to exist. They're not going to be born. So these schools of fish that we use to fish, like en masse, which is again devastating them, and there's going to be a fishery collapse within the next 10 to 15 years if we don't fucking stop or slow down, which again isn't going to happen. Yeah, it's a fucking huge problem. And all ties back to CO2, basically.
Something I've always kind of wondered in regards to like climate change, because obviously climate change is real and we as humans do contribute to it, but the climate has always changed the planet, and so something I wonder is like, is there anything we can actually do to stop that all? Like if we all of a sudden go green, dramatically reduce how much oil we burn and coal we burn, stuff like that. I mean, wouldn't a lot of these changes kind of sort of just happen anyways, potentially?
No.
Because
No,
the planet.
No, sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
you go, Lauren.
At this point, we have caused a new mass extinction event to go into overdrive, and there is no reversing it. So even if we completely stopped what we were doing, there's no going back.
Other climatic warming events happened a lot to do with natural shifts, but also volcanoes. An example would be in Indonesia. I can't remember exactly what the volcano was called, so fucking forgive me, but a massive supervolcano erupted and it blacked out the sun for days in many parts of the world. And as time went on, the ash spread and it caused global temperatures to plummet. And it caused a new ice age for thousands of years, completely almost decimated humanity with a shit show. That would be an example of that. The climate does kind of go up and down, but if you look at the maps or the graphs, the planet has been warming since the 1800s, since the onset of rapid industrialization, and I'm going to get into it, but capitalist growth. So at this point, like Lauren said, there is no going back. What we can do is limit the effect. Warming is going to happen. There's nothing to do to stop it at this point. Warming is going to happen. We've I think it was 350 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. We've passed that threshold. We're in the 400s at this point. We're fucked. We've passed the point of no return. There's nothing we can do at this point. We can limit the effect. And the point of the Paris Agreement, or the Paris Accord in 2015, was to set a global target to prevent 2-degree warming. 2 degree is the worst case scenario. If we pass 2 degrees, we're fucked. We're dead. It'll take hundreds of years to happen, but at that point, our species is probably going to be decimated. Maybe not totally extinct, but pretty fucking vastly. So the oceans will warm, become more acidic, decimating sea life. You're not going to be able to use it. Droughts, excess rainfall with the warming seas and the ice melting and shit. Heat will become more trapped. Desertification will happen more rapidly. And at this point, species loss is dozens of times greater than the normal background extinction rate. So we're dropping species, hundreds a year because of us and the normal background rate. There's nothing to do. We could avoid that 2-degree warming by limiting emissions, but countries are failing to do that. Emissions are set to grow up until 2022, I think. Oil production or oil demand is set to peak around that same time. But at the same time with that, you can't predict economic cycles. These predictions are set to predictions of the economy's health and its future health. There could be a recession, there could be a depression, there could be a sudden boom. India could suddenly start to rise and some weird geopolitical, like a revolution or something happened, or the next leader is just a genius. Same with Nigeria, same with the Congo, Egypt. whatever. But at current predictions, we could limit things to 1.5 degrees and we could manage the effects. We could manage the damage done to us and into the planet with 1.5 degree warming. But we're not set to reach that. We're set to reach 2 degrees. At this point, we've passed the point of no return to where we're going to blow past the 2 degree warming point. Some scientists, some go from 2 to 8 degrees. 8 is like a small, very small kind of radical segment of the scientific community. It's more between 2 and 3 degrees, maybe 4, but the predictions are there. We're fucked. We fucked ourselves. And,
But-
not to beat a dead horse, but in the pursuit of profit.
But the thing is, looking at it though, is sure we are there, but I feel like the problem at the moment isn't even just with what we use at this point. I feel like it's more to do with the people in power, because we have someone like Trump who, being the president of America, says, "Oh, there's no such thing as global warming. It's all bullshit." I'm sorry, but like it's stuff like this that is pretty much gonna fuck it up for everyone. Like if and people actually believe this. Like there was apparently someone who had said that Donald Trump alone stopped global warming. Which, if we're going by stupid shit like that, that's fucked. If people believe things like this, that it's not really happening. Oh, he saved us. We're not going to get anywhere at all unless we have people like him acknowledge it and then actually try and do something about it. It's going to be completely fucked pretty much straight away. I don't think we're going to get anywhere. So the problem is right there, I feel. As soon as they are at least acknowledge it, we are able to then put money, save taxes. Look, if we're raising taxes to save lives, then so fucking be it. We'll pay more of that, but at least use it for something useful rather than more military, more, fighting that, again, doesn't get anywhere. This whole fighting over resources, which barely anyone even has anymore, doesn't get anywhere. These resources, which, if we're going back to the same thing from before, it's the whole idea of resources. If these resources, instead of being fought over, were just shared, which again, it sure wouldn't work as well. It'd be great if it did, but it wouldn't work. Then it would be a lot easier, and a lot of this shit would be fixed. No more fighting. Who really needs to fight anyway? There's barely enough resources to fight over. Instead of fighting over that, you put that money into saving the fucking planet that you live on, which is on its last fucking leg. It's down to its knees at this point, and it's not going to make it.
Right, but in order to do that, you have to radically restructure the entire system.
Sure.
And in order to do that, that means the death of a certain way of life. And this could get into a whole new philosophy I'm just learning about, but in order to change things again have to actually change. And in order to further answer Adam's question about what we can do, we have to restructure the entire system because the system is failing us. The system is causing our death. Our species' death will be our fault. And there are very few examples in history where a species' own death was its own fault. We're very intelligent creatures, but we're also very dumb. We're very short-sighted.
Oh yeah.
We
It's really bad.
and like there is little at this point within this system, within this social relation that we can do to prevent warming, to prevent the worst case scenario. We've already blown that out of the water. It gets into an issue of where, like, let's say, look at China. China is the second most emission producing country, But China has also realized this and has realized the effect of the environment. China wants to grow. I think last year they had a 17 or 18% increase in forest growth. They're planting new forests. By 2022, Xi Jinping wants to grow an area of forest the size of Ireland. So he wants to reverse, because the coast of China has been decimated by these new megacities and shit, and the pollution and the water and everything, that he realizes this, and with the Gobi Desert, expanding, desertification is becoming an issue in northern China. He wants to grow forests and reroute certain rivers to prevent that. And Thomas Sankara was doing the same thing in Burkina Faso after the revolution in Africa, or in Burkina Faso. He wanted to prevent desertification by planting certain plants to have a barrier so his country wouldn't, because again, the planet was warming at the time, and still is, obviously. So we can do things like plant new trees. We can have, if we're going to do logging, which we have to at this time in our species, we can have sustainable logging, things like top cutting. So you only cut the tops of the trees off, leaving the rest of the trunk to regrow. Selective cutting, only cutting aged trees, leaving younger ones to come back. Or if you're going to do clear cutting, which God forbid, every tree you cut down, you plant one or even two to compensate for that. But the issue is trees that we cut down take decades to grow back. Planting one tree isn't going to reverse the impact of the tree that you just cut down, because that tree has been around for potentially up to 100 years. So it's not the same thing. The effects are going to happen for decades no matter what we do. Everything is very slow. And if people are slow to change, like you have fucking Molson Canadian, a beer company, going out every case of beer you buy, they'll plant these amount of trees. That's great. Love that. Thank you. But in the short term, it's not going to do much. In the long term, that's great. It's a great idea in the long term. But in short-term emission curbing, not really a lot, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, because it doesn't planting trees and taking them, decades to grow properly back to where they need to be. It's not, that rate of growth is not compatible with, various societies' needs for lumber. Right. So like it's a band-aid on the problem, unfortunately, but there's little else that we can do.
I mean, there's like, for paper you can use rice. There's rice paper used from the leftover rice production with like the plant and shit. There's wheat paper, which you have the wheat itself, but then you have the straw and stuff left over, which you can use for paper. There are certain things that you can do that will help with waste and emission, because as plants rot, they release emissions. And to prevent that, which is a large part of our emissions, you can use turn into paper instead of trees. You use rice, which is very popular in Asia because they have obviously a lot of rice. But sustainable projects are very new. It's only in the past few decades that we've embarked on this new, essentially a fight for our own survival. To be a bit dramatic, but at the same time, really not dramatic at all. We've only embarked on this change, this radical change of our species and how we've managed our relations through it fucking centuries, because we realize now that, oh fuck, we're killing ourselves. But it's too late, so what the fuck do we do?
Well, like a small problem with some of what you're saying is, like, on one hand we've done too much damage, and it's like, okay, well, what's the point of doing anything then? Because someone could easily look at a lot of what your guys are saying and say, well, there's no point in even trying to change things.
Because we're not the only ones here. The Earth will be around for far longer than we will, and if we're going to leave an impact, at least we should try to limit things. We should try to reverse damage, because if we're just going to go business as usual, well, our future generations are gonna essentially be killed because of the environmental devastation that we brought upon them. It would then be our fault for their death if we didn't try. And the same thing with animals. Would you rather decimate the entire population of the Earth, plant and animals, or at least the majority of them, for centuries to come? Because in our lifetimes there was little to do to change it. I understand what you're saying, but that's again the short-sightedness of people, because people don't look past our lifetimes, or even in terms of politics, 4 to 5 year presidential terms.
But here's the thing, though.
Well,
it's just
well,
overall. Sorry.
Well, really, what I was trying to say wasn't just so much like I wasn't just looking at short-sightedness as much as like if it's like, well, if we've already done too much damage and we can't reverse it or fix it, then it's like there's almost no point then, because it's like, well, you can't fix it. It's just broken.
Well, I mean,
it's a totaled car.
Right. Well, I mean,
I'm sorry to.
You can't fix it, but you can't fix it, but you limit its effects. So with a totaled car, you can. We're not totaled yet. We're on the way. We're going 100 miles an hour to a fucking immovable object. But if we go down to 50 or 60, then maybe the people in the car can survive. Kind of thing. We won't. We're going to crash. We're inevitably going to crash, but we can turn the speed down in which we crash to prevent total death and total annihilation. We can have someone, maybe even just 1 or 2 people survive in a car, maybe up to 4 people.
But the problem is that, well, there's multiple problems with that. The first one being that we have many people who, again, who promote the idea of it doesn't exist. That's one. 2, we have many people who believe that why should I care? And second of all, oh, it's not my fault. It's not me doing it. You've got other people who don't believe the concept of it at all. They don't think that it exists.
Well, it's ignorance of our.
There are differences between. Look at the fact that there are flat earthers when there's proof. And I've been going on for this for a while now, but it's just like, I mean, just look at, they exist. There are religious people when there's been many times where, go ahead, show them proof of this, show them evidence of that. It doesn't change the mindset. If we actually had many people who were leading, who were on their side, so if we had Trump, many people from any other side, from the UK, anywhere, if they were all to say, yeah, this thing exists and we have to do something about it, then the population can follow, or at least understand and then follow, or at least believe that it exists. But the problem right now is that the people don't believe it. We have leaders don't believe it, and we actually have scientists who are saying it doesn't exist. Now, but I'm going to credit them as scientists. I can't say that they are, but what I can say is it's influencing the mindsets of the people.
Right. And I mean, that comes down to a failure of education, of the education system being so poor and so flawed that it allows pseudoscience to flourish specifically within the United States society. But at the same time, a lot of these scientists and a lot of these groups that push the anti-man-made climate change agenda, I guess, if you look at their funding, they're funded by coal companies. They're funded by oil companies. The largest lobbying group in the United States that's against man-made climate, it's basically climate change deniers. They are funded by coal companies. So again, it's lobbying. It's a company having its say in public policy and in public opinion to sway the voter, attempt to sway the voters and the scientists from making meaningful change that will affect, again, their profits. So but it's also a failure of the education system. The education system isn't teaching this in depth. It's not teaching, here's the natural cycle of Earth warming and cooling. Yes, because there is a natural cycle. But here are factors that contribute to it, like volcanic eruption, like, whatever. But here is, right, but then there's, well, here's what we're doing. Since the onset of the Industrial Revolution, here is the exponential increase in emissions. It's not even just a gradual, it's exponential. It's horrendous. But you have vested interest groups who are not who are funding the opposite and factually incorrect opinion. And it's relying on that kind of ignorance, because there was an example maybe 3 or 4 years ago. A picture was released of Antarctica, and it showed more ice than in previous years. And the scientists were saying, oh, there's more ice in Antarctica. So these groups were saying, oh, climate change debunked, there's more ice. Well, what was going on was really bad. Yes, there's more ice, but why is there more ice? Because the ice is increasing and melting, and freshwater and seawater doesn't mix properly, so the freshwater sits on top of the seawater. And what was going on was that fresh water was freezing because it wasn't salty enough to prevent freezing process. So that fresh water was freezing around Antarctica, showing more ice, but what it was showing was increasing melting and not enough. It's showing increased fresh water in the oceans. So, someone like us who looks into things and, has the brain to actually do deeper research into something would go, okay, that's the issue. But someone who believes the climate change denial agenda, or whatever you want to call it, I hate the word agenda, it's so conspiratorial to me, but, someone who believes in climate denial would just look at that picture and go, oh, debunked. And the coal company funded groups push that narrative out there because, again, it's a poor attempt to discredit the opposition, because it, again, gets into an issue of corporations and profits. So it's groups with vested interests in not having their profits inhibited, but also poor education, and the groups exploiting that poor education and that weird mistrust of government and science that America has. The government part I understand, but I don't understand the weird religiously based mistrust in science that I don't know.
That's just like the anti-intellectualism that exists here in America, and it's almost like people like being dumb.
Yeah, they're literally proud to be fucking retards.
Yeah. Yeah, I dropped out of high school. I'm proud of it. Goddamn.
Yeah, fuck them. The fancy learning fucking bullshit. Yeah.
That weird TJ, like, I'm a high school. Like, TJ is smart, but he's one of those people who's like smart, like self-taught, which is okay. But he's like, I'm a high school dropout, and that's okay. Like, I guess, like, I understand the high school isn't the best, but you should probably still pursue it. Like, I kind of regret slacking off in high school. I don't wish I dropped out, but I kind of wish it was better because,
Was I the only one there that heard her ping out and it sounded like she said, he's hot?
No, that was just on your end.
Oh, okay. Because it sounded like you called TJ hot, and I was like, ooh.
And this is spiraling off into a tangent.
It is, yeah.
Hey, we're dropping the tangent. I just wanted to know if I was the only one that heard that. Can we talk about the Great Pacific Trash Vortex?
Yes.
Oh.
The island of trash.
The island of trash. That's
well, it's not so much an island as it is like microscopic particles of plastic that have been sucked into the North Pacific Gyre and made into, or gyre, I don't know how it's pronounced, regardless. And that has essentially created like a vortex of plastic molecules in the oceans that, sea life can't really escape, and therefore is absorbing into. It's enormous. It's an enormous like vortex of garbage in the Pacific Ocean,
the size of Texas.
Yes.
If not, well, it depends on how you define it. It could be bigger, it could be smaller.
True.
There's no clear way to define it necessarily because of the different kinds of plastics and how much the concentration is and that kind of thing.
And it's constantly shifting.
True.
It's oh wow.
But essentially, like, there are tons and tons of like sea animals that can't avoid eating the plastic or even mistake the plastic for food.
Well, here, I'll clear that up. A lot of animals mistake the plastic for food because microplastic It unfortunately it gives off a smell that mimics the food that the animals will eat. And clean plastic does not have that smell. And they've done studies and tests and have proven it many times over. So unfortunately, they're tricked into believing that, oh, this piece of plastic is, a tiny little, whatever, a krill or something. And unfortunately, even bigger animals will mistake plastic for food. Like sea turtles will mistake plastic bags for jellyfish.
Right. Well, what it ends up being is it's this problem that we're having not just in the Pacific Ocean where they have this enormous vortex of trash, but in many bodies of water in the world where we've polluted the environment so much with garbage that essentially the animals that we are taking out of the water to eat are infested with garbage.
Yeah.
So basically, we are just eating garbage at this point. We're like, if you're eating fish, you're undoubtedly eating plastic.
Yes.
More so in certain other fish than there are in some species of fish, but like the vast majority of the fish that people consume on a daily basis or however often basis is just filled with plastic.
Widely marketed fish from like anywhere in like the far oceans, not saying the deep ocean, but the far oceans, like they generally will have issues with eating microplastic or eating fish that have eaten microplastic.
I mean, fuck, I thought it was bad when Fukushima happened, and then Japanese officials are saying, like, well, the fishing market's going to be pretty fucked. We've got, like, irradiated fish.
No.
We don't know what to do.
So, I mean, this is like far and beyond much bigger than that. I mean, the Pacific like trash vortex was discovered in the 80s, and it's just grown in size since then.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And it's more than likely just going to perpetually grow because of all the pollution and shit in the world. And I guess it just like to link it back to what we were saying, it's this idea that people are heavily influencing the climate and the environments of the planet, and it's not just having a detrimental effect on the environments, but us because we are part of the environment.
Right.
Well, it's getting to the point where on certain islands in like the Pacific, there's seagoing life that cannot, dwell on these islands properly because there's so much trash on the shores.
I've also heard that things like the Great Pacific Trash Vortex also allow for more. I don't know how true this is. I'd have to look into it some more. But if it is true, I've heard that it can even allow more buoyancy in certain animals, which allow them to travel greater distances than they would otherwise, allowing invasive species to take over new environments that they previously couldn't get to.
That's
Well, certain invasive species also cling to the larger bits of plastic, and they're carried along the currents, and they kind of like either come adrift or they like attach themselves and they kind of just go on their merry happy way in a direction that they would have never fucking went.
Right. And so we're introducing species that shouldn't even be in these areas and will have a detrimental effect on these areas to these areas.
Right, because these invasive species would only get to certain areas before through the way of other animals that traveled long distances. Now it's happening through humans that, either it's through their plastic or through their watercrafts. And it's so common that, like, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent. Say the Great Lakes. You cannot, if you're going to the Great Lakes, you cannot have a dirty boat if you're going because you cannot pollute them because there's already a problem with them trying to make sure that they don't get things like zebra mussels.
Oh, those are a bitch. Those are all over where I live, and they fucking hurt. I hate like to add into the Great Lakes thing, because I live on the Great Lakes, I know a fair amount of, at least like Ontario is where I live on. Zebra mussels are a bitch. They're horrible. They're invasive as fuck. They spread like wildfire in a fucking dry bussy. It's horrible. But there's a fish called the guppy, I think. Basically, it eats eggs. It's
The
a bottom
guppy.
feeder. It eats eggs, and you're supposed to report it and kill it when you catch it. They're small fish. They're not large fish. But when you catch it, you kill it and you report to the ministry. And then if you catch any more, then you have to report exactly how many you caught to kind of give an approximation of whatever. We caught several. A couple years ago, I went fishing at this local conservation area, um, which I don't think was legal. Anyway, it wasn't my idea. It was somebody else. Anyway, we went fishing. They were fishing. I was off in the woods with friends. And I came back, and they had caught several of these fish, the gobies or guppies or something like that.
Guppy.
Guppy, yeah, whatever the fuck they're called. But they're horrendous little fish. They're fucking disgusting little creatures. But yeah, they smashed them with rocks, and they were part of the ministry. And the ministry's like, oh fuck. But there's also this fish from South America, I believe. Basically, it's like mid-evolved, and it has its fins effectively act as legs, and they come on land, and they have nasty fucking teeth. They attack dogs. They've been known to attack kids in Florida. They can cross land for short distances and go back into water, and they can jump river to river because they can cross fucking land. And they're violent.
What is the name of that
I'll
fish?
try and fucking find what they're called.
By the way, the thing you were talking about is a round goby.
Okay.
I think
I was about to say, when you were saying guppy, I was like, you mean like those little fish that you get for fish tanks? Like, damn, I didn't know they did so much damage. Like,
On a side note, Vortex of Trash would be like a great metal song title.
oh, dude, like you should listen to just a shout out to one of my favorite bands. You guys should listen to Cattle Decapitation. They did an album called The Anthropocene Extinction that covers a lot of environmental topics. It's a fucking fantastic metal album.
I'll give that a look-see.
Oh, hell yeah.
They called the snakehead. I think this is a fish.
Oh, snakeheads.
Oh no.
Let me look at that. Oh. No.
Is
No, it's
it
not.
a lamprey?
Not a fish. But this fish, I'm thinking it's not a snakehead, I don't think.
It has
fish-
two front, arms or legs.
Well, it has to be some kind of lungfish.
Yeah, it has basically, it can breathe air for a short amount of time, and it can travel on land, and its fins act as like they can use them as basically like arms to drag themselves. And they don't get very large in most areas, but they do attack small animals, and they have attacked kids in Florida. Like I think there's very rare instances of it, but that's why when you live in an area in Florida with like canals with like boats and shit near the coast, you don't go in the canals because alligators, snakes, but these fucking fish. But these are also in the Great Lakes, and they're increasing in severity of like, this is now a problem. Like they're rare in the Great Lakes, and there was one spotted where I live in the bay here. I don't know if it was confirmed. It might just be a rumor. I don't know, but the rumor enough is kind of freaky. But yeah, like invasive species is a huge problem. Like with Lauren and Daniel said about traveling on watercraft. With the tsunami in Japan, British Columbia and the coast of Washington and California and Oregon, now they're being bombarded by junk from Japan in the tsunami that was kind of just pushed out to sea. And on these boats, there's mussels, there's fish, there's eggs, there's all these things from Japanese waters that are now in North American coastlines. They're not really taking hold, and they're not really surviving because we are significantly more north. But the problem is what if they do? Because they're going to decimate local fish populations potentially, unless a fish, is a predator to them and finds them as prey.
Yeah.
Are they called big heads?
Let me Google it. 1 second.
Because what I'm seeing are Asian carps.
Yeah, well, Asian carp is also a huge problem in Lake Michigan. I have to look for the fish back. and walk on land.
Well, while she's looking at that, it also, I mean, the problem of the invasive species also goes both ways because you have the opposite effect where for instance, I remember just last night, Lauren was showing me these birds in Florida that were essentially they evolved in the swamplands of Florida, and they used their long beak. I think they're a type of ibis.
It's a type. It's white ibis.
Yeah, the white ibis. They use their long beaks to like dig into the marshlands in Florida for food, and essentially because of the destruction of their natural habitats, the destruction of the swamplands in Florida, they no longer have anywhere to live. So they've moved into urban areas where they eat garbage and have become like basically a nuisance.
Yeah, it's a pretty big nuisance in Australia. That happens a lot.
Yeah, well, it's because of the destruction of natural habitats for these animals.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of like people don't understand the depth of effect that human activity has had on changes in various ecosystems. A lot of these animal displacements and invasive species, whether that's, plant species or animal species, is largely because of, industrial development, because of clearing land, because of dredging up wetlands and marshes and, trying to clear things out and irrigate things and make farmland and whatever the fuck else we do. We're destroying the habitats of a lot of species who have no choice but to go somewhere else, and that creates like almost like a domino effect of fucking up various ecosystems.
Right, and then they become natural pests in areas where people don't want them, but they don't have anywhere else to go. So, I mean, if you destroy the natural environments where these animals live, they're going to move into other environments or die.
Well, that's it's basically the same thing with human immigration. Like that's what was pissing me off so much the other night when me and Willow were watching a documentary on the Libyan slave trade. So many of those slaves were displaced from Nigeria, and it pissed me off because I'm looking at these human beings suffering. Like me and Willow are sitting there crying, looking at people who are suffering and dying in a fucking like facility. The Libyan government can't do anything to help them. Like, and it just reminds me of how whenever anybody would get pissed off in my family about like, oh, why don't the immigrants go back to their homes? A lot of these people don't have homes to go back to.
Right.
Like this whole Syrian, like, well, why does my country have to take in Syrian refugees? Because they literally don't have a home, and now they have to displace and find some other society to live in. You dumb fuck.
Right. Well, the difference being is that like those are human beings that can easily, well, to varying degrees, somewhat easily acclimate to a new society. These animals no longer have the environments they evolved to live in.
Right.
They have to
It-
completely adapt to a new environment.
So then
It's,
you're going to have generations of those animals dying because they don't have the right adaptations through evolution to adapt to a new environment.
Correct.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So it's either extinction or they die off in fast enough numbers that they become an endangered species, and then some country tries to, do some conservation efforts, and you basically just hope you can keep them alive until they evolve fast enough to adapt to their new environment.
Oh yeah.
Or they're
they-
like raccoons and they just like take to fucking urban areas like a wildfire. I mean,
Raccoons,
it depends on the species.
deer.
And we see that with deer too. With like there are so few wolves left in North America. There are so few predatory species that deer have to worry about. More deer get killed per capita by drivers than by predatory species. And then like you have to hunt them to make sure that they don't overpopulate, and then you have to conserve them to make sure when their numbers get too. It's a whole fucked situation. All because we had to destroy natural habitats. We had to take out naturally predatory species.
Right.
To the point where they're so hard up for trying to conserve the few rare animals they have left. What was that whole thing with like the white rhino in some country in Africa?
There's one northern male white rhino left, and he is sick.
It's literally under armed guards. Like there are literally dudes with AK-47s, like making sure nothing comes up to fuck with this rhino.
I thought the rhino was killed.
No, he's sick.
Oh, I thought it was killed. Okay.
No, there was another one that was killed. He is the last
Oh.
living one.
Oh, okay. Yeah. An example of that I brought to Adam earlier before the stream was so you have in South America, because everything's getting warmer, you have trees and plants. Oh, as you know, obviously trees and plants being an aware consciousness to the climate around them, they've had, obviously they've had to do that. As things get warmer or whatever, the climate shifts, they travel through seedlings and stuff overland to a climate that's more, accommodating to them. So you have like a flat land where a plant can migrate over time where it needs to go. But then you have a mountain area. Well, a tree is going to migrate up the mountain, not mountain to mountain. It's going to go up the mountain to reach a colder climate because the forest floor is becoming too warm. Well, they can only go so high before they inevitably die. It gets too cold, or it stays too warm, or it reaches the tip where it can no longer go anywhere. It's going to die. So you have an issue of plants can't migrate fast enough, faster than we're warming the planet. So they're dying off quickly. And there's new diseases all the time popping up, or diseases that we're finding out about, or whatever. There's plant-based diseases that are killing off these animals or these plants in greater numbers because the climate is warming. And they can't accommodate quick enough. They can't evolve fast enough with the growing times to continue living. And with animals need a certain range. Let's say, I think it was a cheetah needs like 40 miles in its lifetime to effectively survive. If you limit that down over time, species won't survive because they're going to be pushing them closer and closer together, and they're going to start, killing each other or battling for mates or for land or territory or whatever. That they won't survive over a longer period of time. So there was an experiment done in Brazil with American scientists where they went to Brazil, and there was a forest cutting operation for farms. The Brazilian government allowed them to have specific couple mile, or not mile, but I think it was like a mile square of land, and they want to basically research these plots of land and see if animals can continue to survive within these sectioned off areas of land, to see if, okay, well, maybe we can farm around areas of land. Well, over time, everything left. Insects, monkeys, like mammals, birds, everything just left. Or most things had left. Bugs relatively stayed, but there were certain things that had fucked off as well. And then they found out that we need a certain amount of range for animals because resources become exploited and can't grow fast enough. Then they're consuming them because there's not enough space to bounce from resource to resource and not allowing plants to grow enough to consume them later. So it's also becoming an issue of like, well, habitat loss is now a bigger problem than we had thought because we're pushing species together, and it's now they're competing for resources. And the Amazon seems massive, and the great, whatever the fuck the rainforest in Canada is called, the massive boreal forest is what it's called, boreal forest. Well, these are massive plots of land that have these forests, but they're being cut down at a very incredible speed of like multiple football fields a day for cattle, for soy, for soy, but also for palm oil in the case of Indonesia. Madagascar has less than 10% of its natural fucking forest because of deforestation. Haiti has no fucking forest or little forest left because of charcoal production. The Dominican Republic is going through the same thing. The Dominican has very strict laws on deforestation because poor people are going into the wilderness, which they can't help. It's a poverty issue. They're going into the wilderness, cutting down trees, making charcoal out of them. But now the island is being decimated of its natural of its habitat.
Wait.
You know,
Are you talking about an American football field or a soccer field?
an American
Get
football
outta
field. You asshole.
Get out of your own hangout, you piece of shit.
What of Canadian football?
Wait, what is it like? Is that football in the metric system, or like what's going on?
Gosh,
Canadian football is in the metric system.
I'm sorry, Willow.
Yeah, Canadians actually have their own gridiron football with slightly different rules to American football, and they also play European football. Oh,
All right, guys, let's switch topics to football.
right,
Obviously, that's where we're headed.
Good night.
Willow, did you have
I mean, I
anything
would switch topics and then just drop out because I have nothing to fucking say about it. That was the extent of my football knowledge.
Willow, do you have any more to say?
No, I was just kind of going on a tangent about studies and habitat loss.
That's fine. I actually think we've pretty thoroughly discussed the topics that we've had. Does anyone else have anything to say?
Not really. No.
No, I just find it kind of bizarre that I had almost nothing to say on wages and like government and stuff earlier. Like that's usually like my forte, where I like to talk about it a lot. But then I got all fucking passionate about environmentalism. Whatever.
It's all right.
I think I effectively avoided another capitalist rant because I could have went into that.
Oh, you started. You started.
I could have went into environmentalism and capitalism, but I avoided it. So you're welcome.
you're just chomping at the bit to do fucking capitalism bullshit.
I am. I could have went into overpopulation as well, but I didn't do that either because that would have again capitalism.
Oh my god.
Oh my god, don't ever do that again.
I think we've hit a point where now it's just shit posting, so we should probably end it.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I think we effectively have talked another topic through the ground and transformed it into another thing. So
Yeah.
When we end up on football, like I think we're done. Like,
Yeah.
Jeez.
all right, that's all, folks. That's it for today. If anyone happens to watch this after the fact, thank you for watching it after the fact. Because no one really watched it during. So
Follow